Hello, listener. The fact you hear this means you're alive. If you're new here, consider subscribing and comment below where you're listening from. Let's begin the story. The barograph pen stopped moving at 3:47 in the morning on August 12th, and that was the first thing that told me something was wrong, before the phones went out, before the radio, before any of the rest of it. A barograph pen doesn't stop. Not on Grey Butte, not at 9,200 feet on the north shoulder of Mount Shasta, not on a station that had been logging pressure without a break since 1978. The paper drum kept turning. The pen kept a straight, dead line across the ruled scale like somebody had unplugged the sky. I was Ellis Marchetti then. I still am, I suppose, though the name doesn't do much work up here anymore. 24 days before the drum stopped, I had taken over the Grey Butte Meteorological Annex from a man named Halvard Ness, who had run it for 19 years and who was moving to Redding to be closer to his grandchildren. The annex isn't a famous place. It doesn't show up on the Mount Shasta postcards. It sits on a bench of black volcanic scree about a mile northeast of Panther Meadow, off a Forest Service spur road that the district ranger closes with a cable gate every October. From the deck you can see the whole Shasta Valley spread out toward Weed and Wairika, and on a clear morning you can watch the shadow of the mountain move across McCloud like a slow blue tide. I had my wife Renata with me for the first 16 days. Then she drove back down to Mount Shasta City to close on the house we were selling in Chico, and she was supposed to come back up on the 11th. She didn't. That's part of the story too, but not the part that starts it. The part that starts it is the barograph pen. I stood in the instrument room in my socks with a mug of instant coffee going cold in my hand, and I stared at that flat line, and I did what Halvard had taught me to do, which was not to trust the instrument until I had checked the instrument. I tapped the glass. Nothing. I opened the case and looked at the inkwell. Full. I moved the pen manually across the drum and it left a clean trace. So the barograph was fine, which meant the pressure hadn't changed in whatever period the pen had been sitting still, and that's not something that happens on a real August morning at that altitude. There's always some small drift. Even in dead calm high pressure, there's drift. I called the National Weather Service office in Medford on the landline. The landline gave me a fast, busy signal, which was strange because we had a dedicated circuit that ran down the mountain on its own pole line and didn't go through the town exchange. I tried the cell phone. No service, but that was normal on Grey Butte. I tried the VHF and got carrier, but no voices on the frequencies I usually heard at that hour, which were the Cal Fire morning check-in and the McCloud Ranger District Coordination Net. The barograph pen twitched once, a tiny hitch. Then it started drawing again, and the trace it drew was falling. Not a normal fall, not a front coming in. It fell like somebody was letting air out of a room. I watched it for maybe 90 seconds, and I did the math in my head, which was one of the things Halvard had drilled into me, the way a piano teacher drills scales, and the rate of fall was about 4 millibars an hour, which for Grey Butte in August was, to use his phrase, not a thing that happened. I logged it. That's the first thing you do. You log it. If the world is ending, you still log it, because the log is the only thing that lets the next person understand what you saw. I wrote, 3:52 Pacific Daylight Time, MSL Press. Falling approximately 4 meters per hour from steady, no frontal indication on satellite loop, no synoptic support, phones intermittent, VHF quiet. I initialed it, EM. Then I went outside on the deck to look at the sky. The sky was clear. That was the other wrong thing. Pressure like that should have had cloud with it. There should have been altocumulus at least, some kind of moisture signature. I had a horizon full of stars fading into pre-dawn and the black bulk of Shasta behind me, and a valley below that should have had the lights of Weed and Wairika and the interstate strung between them like beads. Weed was dark. Eureka had a few lights. The interstate had no headlights on it that I could see, and Interstate 5 at 4 in the morning is never that empty, not even in a snowstorm. I remember I noticed, in the way you notice useless things, that the coyotes weren't calling. There's a pack that lives in the drainage below the annex, and they call every morning around that hour, and they weren't calling. I remember thinking, more clearly than I thought about the pressure, the coyotes. Then the landline rang. I went inside and picked it up, and a woman's voice said, "Grey Butte Annex. This is Sonia at Medford WFO. We're losing you on the circuit. Are you still there?" She sounded like she was reading from something. I said, "Yes, I'm here. My pressure is falling for an hour, and I don't have a synoptic reason for it." She said, "Ellis, listen to me. We're being told to evacuate the office." I don't know why. The order came from the regional director, and it came about 10 minutes ago, and it's not weather. Whatever you're seeing on your barograph is not the storm you think it is. Do you have Halvard's number? I said I did. She said, "Call him. Get him on the line before 6. If you can't reach him by 6, open the yellow envelope in the bottom drawer of his desk. He left it for you." Then the circuit gave me the fast busy again, and Sonia was gone. I did not open the drawer. Not yet. I called Halvard. His phone rang 11 times, and his voicemail picked up, and it was still his old outgoing message, the one where he says, "This is Hal. Leave a number. I'll call back when the weather lets me." I did not leave a message. I hung up. I called Renata. Her phone went straight to voicemail without ringing, which meant her phone was off, or she was out of coverage, and Mount Shasta City had coverage. I stood in the instrument room and I made myself think. I was 41 years old. I had a bachelor's degree in atmospheric science from UC Davis and 11 years at a private meteorological consultancy in Sacramento doing wildfire behavior forecasting for utilities, and I had taken the Grey Butte job because Renata's cancer had come back a second time, and we had decided, together, that we were done with cities. The annex paid less than half what the consultancy had. It came with the cabin. It came with 300 acres of Forest Service permit around it. It came with a generator, a 2,000-gallon propane tank, a 5,000-gallon water cistern fed from a spring above the deck, and a shortwave rig that Halvard had installed himself in 1994. The cabin had 1 bedroom, 1 wood stove, 1 gas range, and a west-facing window that framed the mountain like a painting nobody had signed. Renata had said on the drive up in July, "Ellis, if anything ever happens, stay on the mountain. Don't come looking for me." I mean it. I had said, "Nothing is going to happen." She had said, "Something is always happening. Stay on the mountain." At 5:14 that morning, the pressure stopped falling and stabilized at a value about 18 millibars below where it should have been for the season in altitude, which is a value you might see in the eye of a hurricane, except Grey Butte does not get hurricanes, and the sky was still clear. At 5:17, the short wave gave me a voice for the first time. It was a man on 7.202 megahertz, and he was saying over and over, in a voice that had gone past, tired into something else, "This is Whiskey 6 Charlie Delta November, McLeod, California. If anyone can hear me, the town is not safe. Do not come to McLeod. Do not come to McLeod." He said it maybe 6 times, then he stopped, and I heard him breathing, and then I heard him say, "Off mic. Okay, honey, okay." and the transmission ended. I wrote it in the log. 5:17 Pacific Daylight Time. 7.202 megahertz, unident male, whiskey, 6 Charlie Delta November, McLeod. Do not come to McLeod. I initialed it. I opened the yellow envelope. Halvard's handwriting was on the outside. It said, Ellis, if Sonia told you to open this, you already know. Read it in order. Inside was a single sheet of graph paper folded twice, and on the paper he had written a list of 11 things, numbered. 1. The propane tank gauge reads high by about 18%. Real capacity is closer to 1,600 gallons. Plan accordingly. 2. The spring above the deck is reliable except in October drought years. The overflow pipe freezes at the third bend. Wrap it before Halloween. 3. The generator will run on straight kerosene in an emergency. Do not tell the manufacturer. 4. There is a second cistern buried under the woodshed. Halvard's father dug it in 1961. It holds about 800 gallons and it is not on any map. 5. The shortwave antenna is grounded through the deck footing. If lightning hits the ridge, disconnect the coax at the desk, not at the antenna base. 6. On 3.818 megahertz upper sideband at 2100 Pacific. Every night there is a net called the Cascade Watch. They will not answer strangers. Say the word Panther and they will listen. 7. The Forest Service cable gate on the spur road can be lifted off its posts by 2 people. The lock is only there for insurance. 8. The nearest neighbor who will help you is a woman named June Ohanesian. Retired 3 miles down the spur, brown house with a green metal roof. Keeps goats. She has a satellite phone. She hides it in the freezer. 9. The nearest neighbor who will not help you is a man named Roy Fenton, half a mile up the ridge from June. He runs cattle in the summer. Do not trust him around fuel. 10. If the sky ever goes wrong and the pressure drops without weather, you will have about 6 days before people start moving. 11. Renata knows about this letter. She read it before I sealed it. She agreed with everything in it. I sat down on the floor of the instrument room and I read that letter twice. Item 11 was the one that stopped me. Renata had read the letter. Renata had agreed with everything in it. Renata, my wife, who had said stay on the mountain, had known there was a letter that said the pressure might drop without weather, and if it did, I would have 6 days before people started moving. She had known, and she had not told me. I don't remember what I did for the next hour. I think I made coffee again and drank it standing up. I think I checked the barograph 3 or 4 more times. I think I said her name out loud, once in a voice that surprised me. I know that at some point I went out on the deck and looked down at the valley again, and the interstate was still empty, and the sky was still clear, and the pressure at Grey Butte was still 18 millibars low for no reason at all. At 7:40, the landline rang again. It was June Ohanesian. She said, Ellis, this is June, 3 miles down. Halvard gave me your number. Is your radio working? I said the shortwave was. The landline was intermittent. The VHF was quiet. She said, come down here at 10. Bring nothing. Don't drive. Walk. I need to show you something, and I don't want to say it on the phone. I said, is Renata all right? There was a pause on her end that was long enough that I understood the pause was the answer. Then she said, I don't know, Alice. I really don't. But come down at 10. I walked down at 10. It took me an hour and 12 minutes because I stopped twice to listen. Once for the coyotes, who still weren't calling, and once because I thought I heard an engine on the spur road below me, and I stepped off the road and got behind a Jeffrey pine and waited. And no engine came, and after a while I decided I had imagined it. I don't think I did. I think it was Roy Fenton's truck going up past my turnoff, and I think if I had been on the road when he came past, this would be a different story, or no story at all. But I don't know that for sure. I only know I stepped off the road. June's house was brown with a green metal roof, like the letter said. There were 4 goats in a pen out back. June was in her 70s, small, gray-haired, wearing a canvas barn coat over a nightgown, and when she opened the door, she looked at me the way a nurse looks at somebody who has just been told bad news and doesn't know it yet. She said, "Come in, sit down. I have coffee." I said, "Where is Renata?" She said, "I don't know where Renata is right now. I know she left Mount Shasta City yesterday afternoon at about 2, driving her Subaru up the Everett Highway toward the Bunny Flat trailhead. She called me from a gas station in Weed at 1:40 and asked me to tell you, if she didn't make it back by dark, that she was sorry. She said you would understand what she was sorry for. She didn't come back by dark. That's what I know." I sat down at her kitchen table. She poured me coffee. There was a satellite phone on the table between us, out of its case, blinking. I said, "The letter said you hide it in the freezer." She smiled, just barely. "Hal put that in there because he thought it was funny. I hide it in the freezer when the assessor comes. Right now, the assessor is not coming." She pushed the phone across the table. "You can try her again from this. It's better than the landline, but I have to tell you something first." I said, "Tell me." She said, "Yesterday afternoon between 3 and 5 o'clock, something happened in Mount Shasta City and in Weed, and I think in Wairika too. I don't know what it was. I know that at 3:20 my nephew called me from the Ray's food place in Mount Shasta City and told me people were running out of the store and he didn't know why. He said he was going to lock himself in the back office. That was the last time we talked. At about 4 o'clock, the power went out here. My generator came on. At about 4:30, I heard sirens on I-5 that didn't stop. At about 6, the sirens stopped all at once. Since then, I've been trying to reach my sister in Redding, and I can't. My son in Chico, I can't. The highway patrol, I can't. The only person I've reached is you, and I only reached you because Hal made me promise to." I said, "What's on the mountain?" She said, "I don't know, but something is wrong with Shasta today. There was a low rumble at about 2 this morning that wasn't a rumble like an earthquake. It was more like a long sigh, and the animals have been quiet since." I picked up the satellite phone. I dialed Renata's number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I dialed it again. Same thing. June said, "Ellis, listen, I have known Hal for 31 years. He told me 2 things about you before he retired. He told me you were the best young technician he'd ever trained, and he told me that if the sky ever went wrong, you would try to go find your wife, and it would kill you. He asked me to sit you down and tell you not to." I said, "She told me the same thing." June said, "Then honor it." I did not answer her. I drank her coffee. I looked at the satellite phone, which was still blinking, and I thought about all the things I could do with it that would not be going to look for Renata, and I made a list in my head of who I could call and what I could ask, and I put my wife at the bottom of that list, and then I made myself accept that I had put her there. I said, "Can I use this to call Medford?" She said, "Use it for whatever you need. It bills to a dead man's credit card. He set it up that way on purpose." I called the Medford Weather Forecast office. I got a recording that said the office was closed and to call the Sacramento office. I called Sacramento. I got a recording. I called the Sacramento office's after-hours emergency line, which is not a number the public has, and it was answered on the second ring by a man who said, "Who is this, and how did you get this number?" I said, "This is Ellis Marchetti at the Grey Butte Annex on Shasta. Sonia at Medford told me to open a letter, and the letter told me to call this net at 2100. I have a pressure anomaly of 18 millibars low and no synoptic support, and I have a shortwave contact in McLeod telling people not to come to McLeod." There was a pause. Then the man said, "Marchetti, Hal's replacement." "Okay. Listen, I can't tell you what this is. I can tell you it is not weather. I can tell you the anomaly is being observed at every station on the west side of the Cascades from Lassen to Rainier. I can tell you the anomaly correlates in time with a public health event that started yesterday afternoon in Reading and has spread faster than any epidemiological model we've ever run. I can tell you that if you are on Grey Butte, stay on Grey Butte. I can tell you that the Cascade WatchNet tonight will have instructions. Do you have the password?" I said, "Panther." He said, "Good, Marchetti. One more thing. Your wife's name is Renata, is that correct?" I said, "Yes." He said, "There is a Renata Marchetti on a list I'm looking at right now. The list is people who were admitted to Mercy Medical Center in Mount Shasta yesterday afternoon between 2 and 4. I do not know her status. I'm telling you this because Hal told me you would ask, and I am saving you the ask. I'm not telling you to go there. Do you understand?" I said, "I understand." He said, 2100, 3.818 upper sideband. Panther. Good luck, Marchetti." He hung up. I gave June back her satellite phone. She looked at me and she did not ask what I had heard. She said, "You'll walk back up now?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Come down every third day at noon. Bring the shortwave log. I have goat's milk and I have eggs and I have more flour than I can use in 5 years. Hal and I traded for decades. We'll trade." I said, "Roy Fenton." She said, "Roy is a problem for later, not today. If he comes up your road, don't be at home. If he comes up my road, I'll be at home. That's how we do it." I walked back up. It took me 2 hours because I stopped more often. The sky stayed clear. The pressure at Grey Butte when I got back and checked it had risen 2 millibars and then stopped. The barograph pen was moving normally again, drawing the small, ordinary drift of a mountain morning, and if I hadn't seen the flat line, I would not have believed it had happened. I spent that afternoon doing things I had been putting off. I filled every container in the cabin with water from the cistern tap. I checked the propane tank gauge, subtracted 18% in my head, and wrote the corrected number on the tank with a grease pencil. I walked out to the woodshed and moved the split rounds until I found, under a false floor of plywood and dirt, the iron ring of a cistern hatch that Halvard's father had put in 1961. I lifted it. There was water down there. Cold, clean, smelling faintly of stone. I closed the hatch and put the wood back the way it had been. I did not open the shortwave desk drawer where Halvard kept the paper logs going back to 1994. Not that day. I would open it later. At 20:55 that night, I turned on the shortwave and warmed the rig for 5 minutes and tuned to 3.818 upper sideband. At 2100, exactly, a woman's voice said, "Cascade Watch, this is net control, Rainier. Check in by call sign, north to south." I listened for 11 minutes as call signs came in from Washington, then Oregon, then Northern California. I counted 23 stations. Some of them were fire lookouts. Some of them were weather stations. Some of them were private. When Net Control asked for late check-ins, I keyed the microphone and said, "Net Control, this is Gray Butte, Shasta, California. I have the password Panther." There was a pause. Then Net Control said, "Gray Butte, welcome. Hal told us to expect you. Stand by for traffic." The traffic that night was a list, read slowly, of towns confirmed compromised and towns believed still holding. Mount Shasta City was on the compromised list. Weed was on the compromised list. Wairika was believed holding. McLeod was compromised. Dunsmuir was unknown. Redding was described, in a phrase I remember exactly because it was the first time I heard it, as past the arithmetic. I did not key up again that night. I listened to the whole net. It ended at 21:47 with Net Control saying, "Cascade Watch clear. Same time tomorrow. Take care of your people." I sat in the dark, and I said Renata's name out loud once more, and then I made myself go to bed. That was day 1. Days 2 and 3 I remember less clearly than day 1. I know I logged the pressure every hour. I know it stayed roughly 2 millibars low and never came back to normal, though nobody I asked on the net ever explained what the anomaly was. I know I walked the perimeter of the Forest Service permit, and I made a mental map of every place a person could come up onto the bench from below, and there were 4 such places, and one of them was the spur road, and the other 3 were game trails through the manzanita. I know I moved the axe from the woodshed to the porch. I know I loaded Halvard's shotgun, which was a plain 12-gauge pump that he had left behind with a note that said, "In the closet, shells on the top shelf. Don't be dramatic about it." And I put it beside the door. Day 4, the first person came up the road. He was on foot. He was maybe 30, wearing what had been a UPS uniform, and he was carrying a child. The child was 6 or 7 years old and was asleep or unconscious against his shoulder. He came up the last switchback of the spur road at about 2 in the afternoon, and he stopped 40 feet from the porch, and he did not come any closer. He said, "I'm not sick. She's not sick. We walked from McLeod. I need water, and I need to sit down, and if you tell me to leave, I will leave." I was standing on the porch with the shotgun in my hand, not pointed at him, held across my body the way you hold a shotgun when you have not decided yet. I said, "How did you find this road?" He said, "There's a map at the ranger station in McLeod with all the private permits marked. I took the map. I'm sorry." I said, "What's her name?" He said, "Josie. She's my niece. Her mom is my sister. Her mom didn't make it out." I looked at the child. She was breathing. Her face was slack against his shoulder in the way children sleep when they have walked past their limit. He was shaking, not from fear, from having carried a child up a mountain for I did not want to know how many miles. I said, "Set her down on the porch. Sit down next to her. Don't come inside. I'm going to bring you water and food, and I'm going to look at her, and if she has a fever, we have a different conversation." He set her down. He sat next to her. He put his head in his hands, and he did not cry, which somehow was worse than if he had. I brought water in 2 mason jars. I brought a loaf of the bread I had baked that morning because I had needed something to do with my hands. I brought a thermometer. Her temperature was 99.1, which is not a fever in a child who has walked all day in August. His temperature was 98.6. I brought them a blanket. I sat on the far end of the porch, 20 feet from them, and I asked him his name. He said, Dominic Vaquero. Nick. I said, Ellis. Nick, I'm going to ask you a hard question, and I want you to answer it honestly, because your niece's life depends on the answer. In the last 72 hours, has either of you been bitten or scratched or bled on by any person or animal, alive or otherwise? He said, No. I would tell you. I want you to trust me, and I know the only way you're going to trust me is if I tell you the truth about what I saw and what I did. So I'll tell you. I said, Not yet. Eat first. Sleep on the porch tonight. I'll bring you more blankets. If your temperature is the same tomorrow morning, I'll let you sleep in the woodshed. If it's the same the day after, I'll let you inside. That's how we do it here. He said, Okay. Thank you. Okay. He ate. He drank. He tried to feed Josie, and she wouldn't wake up all the way, but she drank a little and then went back down. He fell asleep, sitting up against the porch rail with her across his legs, and I sat on the other end of the porch with a shotgun across my knees, and I watched the sky get dark over the valley, and I thought about how Halvard's letter had said 6 days, and this was day 4, and Nick had come up alone, which meant the flood had not started yet, only the trickle. That night on the Cascade watch, I reported him. Net Control said, Grey Butte, log him. 2-day quarantine minimum, 4 preferred. If either of them shows sign, you know what to do. I said I knew. I did not know. I said I knew because I did not want the woman on the radio in Rainier to think I was a person who needed to be told twice. Day 5. Nick's temperature was 98.4, and Josie's was 98.9, and she was awake and she was quiet. I moved them to the woodshed. Nick asked if he could help with anything, and I said yes. You can split wood. There is always more wood to split. And he split wood for 4 hours without stopping, and I understood that he was a person who needed a task, the way I was a person who needed a log. Day 5 afternoon, the second person came up the road, and it was Roy Fenton. He came in a green Ford pickup with a spare fuel can in the bed. He stopped at the porch. He didn't get out. He rolled down his window and he said, Marchetti, Hal's replacement. Heard you had company. I said, How did you hear? He said, June told me. She calls me sometimes, not often. She called me this morning because she wanted me to know that a UPS driver walked past my cattle gate yesterday with a kid and that you took them in. I said, That's right. He said, You know what I do for a living, Marchetti? I said, I know you run cattle. He said, I run cattle in summer, and I run a fuel depot in winter out of a Quonset hut behind my house for the Forest Service and Cal Fire and anybody else who has an account. I have about 4,000 gallons of diesel and about 1,800 gallons of gasoline in tanks that are not on any inventory that anyone is going to be checking anytime soon. I am telling you this because I want you to understand that I am the most important neighbor you have, and I am not the enemy Hal made me out to be. Hal and I had a personal disagreement about a woman 30 years ago, and he never got over it. That's the whole story. I said, Okay. He said, I want to make you an offer. I will trade you fuel for shortwave time. You have the only station on this ridge that's talking to anybody outside this valley. I want to know what they know. In exchange, I will keep your propane topped off through the winter, and I will keep June's tank topped off too, and I will not ask you what you tell them about me. I said, I'll think about it. He said, Think fast, Marchetti. 6 days from now, people from Wairika are going to start walking up this road, and after that, you're going to want a friend with a full tank. He rolled his window up. Then he rolled it back down and he said, "One more thing. The kid in your woodshed. If she stays healthy, she stays. If she gets sick, you handle it yourself. I don't want to hear about it and I don't want to see it. That's my one condition." He drove down the road. I stood on the porch and I thought about it for a long time. I did not like Roy Fenton. I had not liked him inside of 10 seconds of meeting him, but he was right about the fuel, and he was right about the road, and he was right, though I did not want to admit it, about the arithmetic. That night on the Cascade watch, I asked Net Control, obliquely, without naming him, whether it was reasonable to trade transmission access for material support with a neighbor of uncertain character. Net Control said, "Grey Butte, that is a decision for the local operator. Our standing guidance is that any relay that keeps a station alive is a relay worth considering, provided the operator retains editorial control of what leaves the antenna." I said I understood. Net Control said, "Grey Butte, we have a query for you. Do you have any information on a Renata Marchetti believed admitted to Mercy Medical Center Mount Shasta on the afternoon of August 11th? This query is being passed from a station in the Bay Area." I keyed the microphone. My hand was steady. I said, "Net Control, negative. I have no information beyond a second-hand admission report. Who is querying?" Net Control said, "Station identifies as sister of subject. Passing traffic." A new voice came on, female, older than me, tired. She said, "Ellis, it's Marisol. Please tell me anything you know." Marisol was Renata's older sister. She lived in Oakland. I had not spoken to her in 8 months because of a fight over Christmas that neither of us had wanted to have. Hearing her voice on 3.818 in the dark of a Cascade cabin in the 5th night after the sky went wrong is a thing I will not describe accurately here because I don't have the words. I keyed the microphone and I said, "Marisol. She was admitted on the 11th between 2 and 4. I have no status after that. I have not been able to reach her by phone. I have been told by people who would know not to go looking." She said, "Ellis, are you going to?" I said, "No, she told me not to." There was a long pause. Then Marisol said, "That's the right answer. Thank you. Ellis, if you hear anything at all, this net, every night." I said, "Every night." Net Control took the channel back and read the town list, which was longer than the night before, and the phrase, "past the arithmetic," now applied to Redding and to Ashland and to most of the Rogue Valley. And the meeting ended at 21:52, and I sat in the dark, and I understood that I had just told my wife's sister that I was not going to look for my wife on an open frequency in front of 23 witnesses, and that the saying of it had made it true in a way that thinking it had not. That was day 5. Day 6, I took Roy Fenton's offer. I walked down to his place with the shotgun over my shoulder, and I sat at his kitchen table and we wrote out the terms in pencil on the back of a feed store receipt. 2 gallons of gasoline per day of shortwave access, delivered weekly. He would not touch the radio. He would sit in the room while I operated, and he would listen. He would not speak on air. If he heard something he wanted to act on, he would tell me, and I would decide whether to relay. If I refused to relay, he would accept the refusal. In exchange, propane, gasoline, and diesel as needed, subject to his own inventory. We both signed the receipt. He kept the original. I took a photograph of it with the satellite phone June had lent me for the walk. I did not trust him. He knew I did not trust him. He did not seem to mind. Day 7, a woman walked up the road with a broken arm. She said her name was Priya Kellerman. She had walked from weed. Her arm was broken above the elbow, and she had splintered it herself with 2 flat sticks and a strip of a nylon jacket. She said she had been a paramedic for 11 years with the Siskiyou County Ambulance Service, and she had gotten out of weed on the 3rd day when the hospital was overrun, and she had been walking ever since, sleeping in culverts, and she had heard from a man on the road that there was a station up on Grey Butte that took people in if they weren't sick. I quarantined her in the shed with Nick and Josie for 2 days, and then I let her into the cabin because it was clear she wasn't sick. And it was clear now that a paramedic with a broken arm was worth more to me alive than a paramedic dead of exposure in my shed. She set her own arm the 2nd night, with Nick holding her shoulder and me holding the flashlight, and she did not make a sound the whole time she did it, and afterward she drank a shot of Halvard's bourbon and she said, "Well, that's the worst thing I'll do this week, I hope." Priya changed the household. She organized my medical supplies, which had been a shoebox of expired ibuprofen and a first aid kit from the truck. She made a list of what I needed and a list of what could be improvised. She taught Nick how to check Josie's respiratory rate at night. She taught me how to recognize the early signs of the sickness, which she said were, in the people she had seen, a specific kind of restlessness followed by a specific kind of stillness, and she said if I ever saw either of them in a person on my porch, I should not open the door. Day 9, the first group came up the road. There were 6 of them, 4 adults and 2 teenagers. They had come from Wairika in 2 vehicles that had run out of gas at the bottom of the spur, and they had walked up. They stopped at the porch, and their leader, a man in his 50s with a hunting rifle slung on his shoulder, said, "We heard there's water up here." I said, "Who told you?" He said, "A man in weed said the weather station on Grey Butte was letting people in." I said, "That's not exactly what's happening here. Set the rifle down on the ground and step back from it, and we can talk about what is happening here." He looked at me. He looked at the shotgun in my hand. He looked at Nick, who had come out of the woodshed with the axe. He looked at Priya, who had come out of the cabin behind me, and who was holding, I noticed later, a scalpel. He set the rifle down. He stepped back. We talked for 2 hours. Not on the porch. On the road, 30 feet from the porch, in the dust, with the rifle on the ground between us and the shotgun in my lap. I told them the truth, which was that I had water and I had some food, and I could not take 6 more people through a winter at 9,000 feet on a station designed for 2. I told them that there was a woman named June O'Hanishan 3 miles down the spur who had goats and eggs and might be able to take 1 or 2. I told them that there was a man named Roy Fenton half a mile up the ridge from June who had fuel and might be willing to trade labor for shelter. I told them that Wairika, according to the net, was believed holding, which meant that going back to Wairika was not the worst option they had. They did not go back to Wairika. The 2 teenagers and one of the adults, a woman who turned out to be their mother, stayed with June. The other 3, including the man with the rifle, went to Roy. Priya walked them down. She said she wanted to look at Roy in person and see what kind of man he was. When she came back that night, she said, "He's a mean old bastard, but he's a mean old bastard who's going to keep those 3 alive through February." So, day 12, Halvard called on the shortwave. I had not expected to hear from him. His voicemail had never called back. His name had not been mentioned on the net. When his voice came through on 7.202 at 4 in the afternoon saying, Grey Butte, this is Redding. Come in." I sat down at the desk before I picked up the microphone because my legs were not steady. I said, "Halvard, where are you?" He said, "I'm at the Shasta County Emergency Operations Center. I'm in a basement. There are 11 of us in this basement, and we have been in this basement for 8 days. Ellis, listen to me. I don't have much power. The letter. Did you open it? I said, yes. He said, Item 11, Renata. Alice, she came to see me 2 weeks before she left the mountain. She drove down. She told me she was going to try to reach her sister in Oakland. She told me she was not going to tell you because you would try to stop her. She asked me to write Item 11 so that if the sky went wrong before she got back, you would know she had chosen. Alice, she chose. She was not going to Mercy for herself. She was picking up her sister's medication. Her sister has lupus. Renata was going to drive it to Oakland. That was the plan. I did not say anything for a long time. Halvard let me not say anything. Finally I said, is she alive? He said, I don't know, Alice. The last transmission we had from Mercy was on the 12th at 6 in the morning, and there was a Renata M. on the discharged list, discharged AMA at 3:40 on the 11th, which means she got the medication and she left before it started, which means she was on the road south when it started. I don't know what road. I don't know what she did. I know she left Mercy alive. I said, Halvard. Thank you. He said, Ellis, listen, this basement is not going to hold. We have maybe 2 more days. I am telling you this so that when I stop transmitting, you know why. I am also telling you that I am not scared and I am not sorry. Take care of Grey Butte. Take care of June. Watch Roy, but don't underestimate him. And when the Cascade Watch asks you to be a relay for the southern stations, say yes. You are the southernmost live station on the net now. That's an important job. Do it. I said, I will. He said, one more thing. The paper logs in the desk drawer. Read them. My father kept them from 1961 to 1978. I kept them from 1978 to this July. There's a pattern in the pressure data on Grey Butte that goes back 60 years, and it is not natural. Somebody needs to see it who is younger than me. That's you. The transmission ended. I sat at the desk for a long time. Nick came in at some point and put a hand on my shoulder and didn't say anything and went out again. Priya came in later and sat on the floor next to the desk and said, Do you want to talk? I said no. She said, Do you want company that doesn't talk? I said yes. She sat there for an hour. Josie came in at the end of the hour and climbed into Priya's lap and fell asleep, and I watched them and I thought, this is not what I signed up for, and this is what I have, and these are not the same thing, and I have to make them the same thing or none of us will get through November. I opened the paper log drawer that night. The logs went back to 1961, like Halvard had said. His father's handwriting was small and precise and used a fountain pen. Halvard's own writing was larger and used ballpoint. The pressure data was recorded at 6-hour intervals for 64 years. I did not read all of it. I read the anomaly entries, which Halvard's father had marked with a small red circle in the margin, and which Halvard had continued to mark the same way. There were 14 circles. The first was in April 1963. The most recent before mine was in October 2019. In every case, the pressure at Grey Butte had fallen without synoptic support by 10 to 20 millibars over a period of 1 to 4 hours. And in every case it had stabilized at the low value, and then slowly, over 1 to 2 weeks, returned to normal. In every case, in the margin, one of the Nesses had written a single word or short phrase. In 1963, Cuban ships. In 1972, Rapid City. In 1980, Mount St. Helens, 2 days prior. In 1989, Loma Prieta, 4 hours prior. In 2001, September the 10th. In 2019, no correlation filed for review. Beside my anomaly, in a hand that was not mine and not Halvard's, someone had written, in fresh pencil, August 11th, 2025. See? Just that. See. I did not know whose handwriting it was. I asked Nick and Priya the next morning if either of them had opened the drawer. Neither of them had. I looked at the pencil mark under a light. It was fresh. It had been made in the last 2 or 3 days. I did not tell them. I closed the drawer. I locked it. That was day 13. Day 14. The Cascade Watch officially designated Grey Butte as the southern relay. I keyed up and said, Cascade Watch, this is Grey Butte. I accept the relay assignment. Net Control read a list of southern stations that would now check in through me before rolling up to Rainier. There were 9 of them, 2 in the northern Sierra, 3 in the Trinity Alps, 1 on Lassen, 2 in the Coast Range, and 1, which surprised me, in the Warner Mountains on the Nevada line. My net time went from listening for 47 minutes to running a preliminary roll call for 18 minutes before Rainier took over, and my transmission time on the antenna tripled overnight, which meant fuel, which meant Roy. Roy kept his end. He topped off the propane on the 16th. He brought 2 5-gallon cans of gasoline for the generator on the 17th. He sat in my radio room during the net on the 18th with his hands folded in his lap, and he did not speak once, and when it was over, he said, Marchetti. Rainier sounds like a woman who used to be an air traffic controller. I said she had said as much. He said, figured. My ex-wife was one. They all sound like that. Day 19, a man walked up the road who was not right. He was alone. He was carrying no pack. He was moving too fast for a man who had walked a long way. His temperature, when I took it from 20 feet, using the infrared thermometer Priya had brought up from Weed in a paramedic kit, was 103.4. He said, when I asked his name, that his name was Kevin, and he was looking for his daughter, and had we seen her, she was 7, and she had brown hair, and her name was Josie. Nick was in the woodshed. Josie was inside the cabin, asleep. Priya was standing behind me. I said very slowly, Kevin, sit down on the road. Do not come any closer to the porch. I'm going to ask you some questions. He did not sit down. He took 2 steps forward. Priya said quietly behind me, Ellis, his pupils. I said, Kevin, sit down. He took another step. I raised the shotgun. I said, Kevin, I'm not going to ask you again. He looked at me. His face did something that was not quite a face doing anything. He said, Josie. He said it the way a person says a word they are trying to remember the meaning of. I fired once, into the dirt at his feet. He did not flinch. He took another step. Priya said, Ellis. I fired the second time, not into the dirt. I will not describe what happened after that. I did what needed to be done, and Priya helped me, and Nick did not come out of the woodshed, and Josie did not wake up. And when it was over, we dug a hole about 100 yards down the spur, off the road, and we put him in it. And Priya said the 23rd Psalm because she said somebody should, and I said Amen, because I could not think of anything else to say. That night, Nick came into the cabin after Josie was asleep, and he sat at the kitchen table and he said, That wasn't her father. I said, I know. He said, Her father is my brother-in-law. Her father died in McLeod on the 2nd day. I saw him die. I buried him. That was not him. That was a man who had her name because somebody told him her name. Somebody sent him up here. I said, Roy. He said, I don't know, but somebody. I said, I'll find out. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the radio room with the drawer open and the paper logs on the desk and the shotgun across my knees, and I thought about who could have known Josie's name. Roy knew. June knew. The people who had come up on day 9 and gone to Roy knew because I had told them on the road in the 2-hour conversation that I had a girl in the shed named Josie. Any of them could have told Kevin. Any of them could have sent Kevin. The next morning I walked down to June's. I told her what had happened. She listened. She said, "It wasn't me, Alice, but I know who it was. The man who came up with the rifle. His name is Cass Halloran. He is at Roy's right now. He was in Wairika before that, and in Klamath Falls before that. And he has a pattern. He sends sick people up roads to see who shoots and who doesn't. He's figuring out which houses have shooters and which houses have soft hearts. He does this so that later, when he comes up the road himself with the people he actually cares about, he knows what he is walking into." I said, "How do you know this?" She said, "Because my nephew called me from Klamath Falls in June and told me about a man named Cass Halloran who had done the same thing there. I did not think about it again until you described the man with the rifle. Then I thought about it a lot." I said, "What do I do?" She said, "You do what Hal would have done, which is you tell Roy. Roy does not like being used. Roy will handle it. That is what Roy is for, Ellis. That is why he is your neighbor. You do not have to like him for him to be useful." I walked to Roy's that afternoon. I told him. I did not tell him what I thought of him. I told him what June had told me, and I told him what had happened on my porch, and I told him that a man named Cass Halloran was sleeping in his Quonset hut. Roy listened. His face did not change. When I was done, he said, "Marchetti, go home. Do not come back here for 3 days. On the 4th day I will come up your road with your propane, and we will not talk about this again." I went home. 3 days later he came up with the propane. He did not talk about it, neither did I. Cass Halloran was not at Roy's anymore. Neither were the other 2 men who had come up with him on day 9. The mother and the 2 teenagers were still there, and they stayed there through the winter. And one of the teenagers, a boy named Ephraim, eventually came up to Grey Butte to learn radio from me. But that is a later part of the story. Day 31 on the Cascade Watch, a woman keyed up from a station in Redwood Valley in Mendocino County and said, "Net control, I have traffic for Grey Butte. Is Grey Butte on frequency?" Net control said Grey Butte was. She said, "Grey Butte, I have a woman here named Renata Marchetti. She walked in this afternoon. She has been on the road for 19 days. She is exhausted, and she is thin, and she has a fractured wrist, and she is otherwise all right. She is asking me to tell you she got the medication to her sister on day 14, and her sister is alive, and she is coming home when she can." I sat at the desk with my hand on the microphone, and I could not key up. Priya reached over my shoulder and keyed for me. She said, "Redwood Valley, this is Grey Butte. Please tell her that Grey Butte says thank you, and Grey Butte says take her time, and Grey Butte says the mountain is here." Redwood Valley said, "Grey Butte, she's smiling. She says she'll be home before Christmas." She wasn't. She got home in March. But that's not the end of the story either. The end of the story, or the part of it I'm going to tell you now, is this. On the night of day 41, after the net, after Roy had gone home and Priya had gone to bed and Nick had gone out to the shed to check on Josie, I sat at the desk and I opened the paper log to the page with my anomaly and the fresh pencil mark that said C and I sat there, and I looked at it, and I thought about who could have made it. Nick and Priya had said they hadn't. I had watched them since. I believed them. Roy had never been alone in the radio room. June had never been in the radio room at all. The mark was in pencil, not pen. The letters were formed carefully, with a slight leftward slant, and the S in C had a small hook on the bottom that I had seen before. I had seen it on the letter Halvard had left me. Item 11. Renata knows about this letter. She read it before I sealed it. She agreed with everything in it. The S had the same hook, which meant Renata had been in this room, not before she left on the 11th. After. Because the pencil mark was fresh on day 13, which meant she had come back up the mountain in the 6 days between the sky going wrong and the day I found the mark, and she had come into my house, into my radio room, and she had opened the drawer, and she had written C in the margin of my anomaly entry, and she had left again without me knowing. I did not tell Priya. I did not tell Nick. I did not tell Marisol on the net. I did not tell Halvard because Halvard was gone by then, the Reading EOC having stopped transmitting on day 15 the way he said it would. I told the log. I wrote on the night of day 41 in my own hand, under the pencil C. August 12th, 2025. Scene. E.M. Renata came home in March. She had walked most of the way from Oakland. She had a longer story than mine, and it is hers to tell, and I will not tell it here. When she came up the last switchback of the spur road on the afternoon of March 19th, I was on the porch, and Priya was in the cabin with a 2-week-old baby who was not hers or mine, but whose story is also for later, and Nick was splitting wood, and Josie, who was 8 now, was reading a book about horses on the porch swing, and Roy Fenton's green truck was parked next to my woodshed because he had come up that morning to help me fix the generator and had stayed for lunch, which was a thing he did now on Wednesdays. Renata stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. She looked at all of us. She looked at me. She said, "You stayed." I said, "I stayed." She said, "Thank you." That was 2 years and 4 months ago. She's upstairs asleep as I record this. The barograph pen is drawing the small, ordinary drift of a late summer morning. The pressure at Grey Butte is 1.1 millibars low of the seasonal norm, which is where it has been, more or less, since the anomaly, and which nobody on the Cascade Watch has yet been able to explain. There are now 34 stations on the net. I am still the Southern Relay. Ephraim, the boy from Wairika, took my chair on Tuesday and Thursday nights last year, and he's better at it than I ever was. Josie is 10. She wants to be a paramedic. Priya is teaching her. Nick runs the woodshed and the small greenhouse we built the second summer. Roy is 73 and slower than he was, and he still delivers propane on Wednesdays, and he still does not talk about what he did with Cass Halloran, and I still do not ask. June died last November, quietly in her sleep, and we buried her in the meadow above her house with her goats grazing around the hole, and Roy cried at that funeral in a way I did not know he was capable of, and I understood, watching him, that the disagreement about a woman 30 years ago that Halvard had mentioned had been about June, and I understood that some stories do not need to be told in order to be finished. I do not know what the pressure anomaly of August 11th, 2025 actually was. I do not know why it correlated with the sickness. I do not know why my father-in-law's handwriting appears in a paper log from 1972 that I found last spring in the buried cistern under the woodshed, in a tin box that had been down there since before I was born. And that is a mystery I am saving for another recording because I have not decided yet what I think about it. I do not know if my wife is going to tell me someday what she did in the 6 days between August 11th and August 17th of 2025, or how she got up my mountain without me seeing her, or why she wrote "C" in my log and left. I have not asked. She has not offered. We have a lot of years left, or we have very few, and either way there is time. What I know is this. The barograph pen is moving, the propane tank is at 62%, the cistern is full, the shortwave is warm, and the net is at 2100, and Afram is on the chair tonight, which means I have the evening off, which I will spend, as I spend most evenings now, on the porch with Renata, watching the shadow of Shasta move across the valley toward McLeod like a slow blue tide, listening for the coyotes, which came back in the spring of the second year, and which call now every morning at 4, and thinking about all the people who did not make it up my road, and all the people who did, and about the difference between the arithmetic and the choosing, which is a difference I did not understand when I took this job, in which I am still, 24 days and 3 years later, learning. The system survived another day. That is all any of us are promised. That is what I have to give you tonight, listener, whoever you are, wherever you are listening from. If you are on a mountain of your own, log your pressure. If you are in a valley, watch the coyotes. If you are somewhere in between, find your June and find your Roy, and understand that they are both necessary, and that you will not like it, and that liking it is not the point. The pen is still moving. I have to go check the drum. Same time tomorrow. Grey Butte, clear.